Good evening and welcome to Spotlight. Now, Ghana's producer price inflation for March 2022 has hit a high of 19.4%. The previous rate was 15.7%, which was in February. This 19.4% figure is for March 2022. The problem with this figure is that this is the highest the country has recorded since August 2009. Ghana's Statistical Service has said the figures reflected the impact of the Russia and Ukraine war on global commodity prices. We need to understand the background to this, and that's what Spotlight is about this evening. We will be speaking with some statisticians and economists and a farmer. We'll be right back with Spotlight. My name is Nwang Falong. Stay with us. Welcome back to Spotlight. Thank you for staying. I mentioned before we went on that break, Ghana's inflation for March 2022 has hit a record high of 19.4%. Let's quickly go to the Statistical Service, where government's statistician gave a breakdown of the figures.
The month of March 2022 relative to 124.7 the same time last year, specifically March 2021. Using these two indices, that is 148.8 for the month of March 2022 and 124.7 for the month of March 2021, rate of inflation for the month of March 2022 stood at 19.4. This literally means that compared to March 2021, prices of goods and services have gone up by 19.4%. That is between March 2021 and March 2022, prices of goods and services went up by 19.4%. On a month-on-month basis, we are seeing that prices of goods and services between the month of February 2022 and March 2022 went up by 4.0%. The change in prices on a year-on-year basis and on a month-on-month basis is the steepest that we've recorded over the period. Specifically, on a year-on-year basis, the difference of 3.7 percentage points, that is the 19.4% for the month of March 2022 and the 15.7% for the month of February 2022, is the highest since we started seeing an increase in rate of inflation between May and June 2021. On a month-on-month basis, is the highest since January 2022, as we increased month-on-month inflation from 1.2 to 2.1%, showing a 0.9 percentage difference. And between January and February 2022, we saw a 0.3 percentage difference, and now we are seeing a 1.6 percentage difference between February 2022 and March 2022, indicating the steepest increase in the rate of inflation since we saw an upward trend in rate of inflation since our rebase figures.
And that was the Statistical Service giving us some insight into the figures there. It also mentions that it tries to differentiate between food and non-food inflation. But let's take a closer look at the differences in the figures between food and non-food inflation.
At two broad levels, starting with food and non-food and locally produced items and imported items. From a food and non-food perspective, we see a deepening gap between food inflation and non-food inflation, specifically to the tune of 5.4 percentage points, as food inflation for the month of March 2022 stood at 22.4, and non-food inflation for the month of March 2022 stood at 17.0%. Relative to last month, from the perspective of food inflation and non-food inflation, we see that the change in non-food inflation, which is 2.5 percentage points, is twice the change in food inflation, which is 5 percentage points over the period February 2022 relative to March 2022. In February 2022, food inflation stood at 17.4%, indicating a 5.0 percentage difference, while from a non-food perspective, we see the 2.5 percentage difference between non-food inflation and food inflation. In the context of food inflation, we see a close to doubling of food inflation if you compare the food inflation for the month of March 2022 with a rolling average from the period April 2021 to March 2022. The rolling average has an average of 11.8, inclusive of March 2022 food inflation, whereas food inflation for the month of March 2022 again stood at 22.4%. On a month-on-month basis, we see a 0.8 percentage difference between food inflation and non-food inflation, specifically with food inflation month-on-month 4.5% and non-food inflation month-on-month 3.7%. So we see a marginal variation between food and non-food inflation from a month-on-month perspective relative to year-on-year.
He gives some interesting insights there, saying there's a marginal variation between food and non-food inflation. A bit more detail, he mentions foodstuffs such as oil and fats, 28.2%, water, 27.1%, cereal products, 25.0%. If you look at vegetables, 23.8%, fish and other seafoods, 23.7%, and if you look, according to the figures, food inflation recorded a rate of 22.4% in March 2022 compared to 17.4% in February 2022. And non-food inflation, however, recorded a rate of 17.0% in March 2022 from 14.5% recorded in February 2022. But when we take a look at locally produced goods versus imported goods, how are the variables distributed? Let's take a listen to that too.
Item and imported item perspective, we see a percentage difference of 2.7 percentage points, specifically with domestic inflation, i.e. locally produced items standing at 20.0 for the month of March 2022 relative to 17.3 for imported items for the month of March 2022. We do the disaggregation at the 13 division level, and we identify 3 divisions that record inflation figures higher than the national average of 22, national average of 19.4, which was recorded for the month of March 2022. Specifically, we see transport recording inflation of 27.6, followed by food inflation 22.4, and housing, water, electricity, and gas 21.4. All these 3 divisions record inflation rates higher than the national average of 19.4%, indicating that the remaining 10 divisions recorded inflation figures lower than the national average of 19.4. With education.
And that was still the Statistical Service giving us more insight into the figures that we're looking at this evening. We've been joined on the line by Sylvia Delali Abu Bonsra. She's Assistant Farm Manager at Edna Farms, also Best Female Farmer for Tema West. I'm going to be speaking to her shortly. We also have on the line Michael Nyakun Ampem, who is a former Greater Accra Regional Poultry Farmers Association Chairman. If you have been buying eggs on the market, you know that the price of a crate of eggs has increased. He is going to be the best person to explain to us what exactly goes into the pricing and why we are seeing an upward adjustment in the prices of eggs especially. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Spotlight. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
I understand you were Best Female Farmer for Tema West.
Yes, please.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What did they give you?
We had a chest freezer, nice. Wheelbarrow,
nice.
Wellington boots, cutlass, cloth, and wheat bran. Yeah.
No money?
No, please.
Oh, okay. I'm sure the money will come later with the recognition. But you've listened to, I'm sure you listened to some of the videos from the Statistical Service. Have you been listening to the videos we've been playing?
Yeah, I joined in later, so I didn't get the few,
right.
The whole.
Right. The sum of the whole matter is that prices of food is increasing on the markets. Why do you think this is happening?
Let me take it from the poultry industry.
Okay.
Yes. Currently, we are having a lot of challenges with regards to high cost of feed, high cost of vaccine, utility, drugs. The ingredients we use for feed has increased. I don't know, that it has skyrocketed. A cost of 50 kg bag of maize is selling between 160, 170. Concentrate, I think almost everything that we use for the production has gone up. And this has led to us having to increase the cost of a crate of egg, because if we don't do that, we are going to run at a loss.
So apart from the feed, what other thing goes into determining the pricing?
Cost of vaccine, cost of disinfectant, utility cost, farm hands that help. We use sawdust, sometimes rice straw. We change all that, water, light, all that goes into the production.
But, you know, people's argument is that we are producing these eggs locally. Can't the price be stabilized in any way?
That is our wish and our hope as well. But we don't have control over the ingredients, as I mentioned earlier. We don't have control over the cost of maize, soya, concentrate, wheat bran, vaccines, antibiotics, drugs, and all that we use. We do not have control over them. Cost of maize is, it keeps going up by the day.
How long do you see this going on for? And how long has it been going on for to begin with?
I would say the cost of maize and all this, let me say 2 years now.
Okay.
Yes, 2 years now. It has just been crazy. Let me just put it that right when COVID came in.
Then the prices started going south. Let me pull in Michael Nyaku. Let me just get to him for his perspective there, especially on the poultry industry. I think I'm having issues with his line there, so let me stay with you for a moment. Now, we've heard reports that you're planning to increase the prices further. Is this true?
It has already been increased, but unfortunately, it is difficult to sell at that price.
Right. So that is the thing. If it's so difficult to sell, aren't you worried that people might resort to importation instead of patronizing the local eggs?
It is our major concern. Most poultry farmers, some of our colleagues have resorted to selling their birds.
Oh, they sell the birds directly. Okay.
Yes, they've decided to sell off their birds. That is, stop the farming. Because if you look at your expense and you look at what you are making, it is best you do that for now. Let me put it that way.
So your production cost seems to be going higher than the profits.
Exactly. And then consumers and then buyers want to buy the eggs at their own price. And they are being insensitive to, let me say, they don't know what we are going through, because it's when you are explaining to them, it's difficult for them to understand. And I don't know if this is area specific, because most times when they come, they tell you that the eggs from Doma are relatively cheaper than the eggs we are having in Accra.
Interesting. But then you have to transport them all the way to Accra, which will increase the costs on that one also.
They seem to be comfortable with that.
Okay.
Because they still say the prices are a little less than what we are giving them here.
Let's look at the cost, for example, of producing a crate of eggs. 2 years ago, what would be the cost in comparison to today?
Okay, 2 years ago, let me put it in terms of cost of a crate of egg.
Okay.
Let me simplify it like that, yes. The jumbo size, you could get it for 12 or 15 cedis at most. But currently, you will get a jumbo size for 30 or 28 Ghana cedis from the farm
32,
direct.
Yes.
Yes.
And was it cheaper to produce it? I mean, how much cheaper was the production cost compared to now? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Okay, let me say
let's
about
say
70% cheaper.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's a high increase.
Because maize was very cheap, concentrate, the ingredients were very cheap then. But a bag of maize that was selling for 50 to 80 cedis, it's now selling for 170.
I see.
So that's double the price.
I see the change. Now, since the prices started increasing, are you able to make as much sales as you were making previously? Say 5 months ago, 7 months ago, in a week, how many crates would you sell? Compared to now, how many crates you sell? I'm trying to see if the price has had any impact.
Yes, it has. It has. Because let me say, before then, you could even sell, sorry, a whole day's production could get sold maybe the next day or within a week.
When you say a
But
whole
now,
day's production, how much is a whole day's production? How
okay,
many?
I have 12,000 beds currently, and I'm getting, let me say, 100 crates. Yes. And this 100 crates should have been sold in a day.
Okay.
But unfortunately, now you will have people coming in. When they ask of the price, you tell them, and then, okay, can you go down? If they bargain and then it's not possible, or the price you are offering is not favorable to them, they just leave.
So
So you may have to.
if they are leaving,
So you may have to keep. Yeah.
you are being left
Sorry.
with eggs, and eggs are perishable.
That is the problem. So you are forced to give it out at the price that is not favorable to you.
I see.
A typical example is just this afternoon. One of my off-takers was in to pick the eggs, and then I was offering them actually ungraded. I was trying to give them to her at 27. That is the mixed sizes. But she left with just 14 crates out of the over 100 crates I am telling you about. So that is how severe it is.
Okay, this is not a very good situation. But Sylvia, let me go back to the line where Michael has joined us again. We're having issues with his line there. But hi, Michael, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Right. Give us a quick overview of how the poultry industry is performing right now. Okay, I'm not hearing you. Yeah, I'm not hearing you for some reason.
Okay.
Yes, let's try again. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I was saying that the poultry industry is currently going through a lot of challenges. Price increases. In fact, for the feed, those of us who use prepared feed, almost every week there's a price increase in the feed. Either to the price differences are normally about 2 cities or 3 cities. Now they are doing 10 cities and 15 cities per bag. So it's a bit challenging, and those who put their own feed made prices are going up. So unfortunately, the end product, which is the breast and the egg, are refusing to go up. That's the situation now.
Mr. Nyako, I was just asking Sylvia if she can give us a comparison between the cost of production, say a year ago and now. Can you give us a bit of understanding into that? Let's say yes, cost of production for eggs, for example. How was the cost of production compared to today's cost of production?
Last year, the cost of at the beginning of the year, last year, just around this time, the cost of production for a crate of egg was about between 15 and 17 cities, depending on where you were getting your feed. Okay. So we were selling the eggs for 20 cities, 22, 23. Now the cost of production has come to around 22 cities. So it's difficult, and some even have 24. So it's difficult to come below 24 cities. You have to be selling between 25 and 27. You can make any margin for you to be able to pay. Make even and probably make a profit. So that's the challenge we are encountering now, and that's the situation actually.
At the association level, has there been any discussion or any form of intervention? Because Sylvia also mentioned that sometimes, they're left saddled with eggs they cannot sell because people are not buying due to cost, and then the eggs go bad. So what is the intervention that is being put in at that level?
Yes, around every year around this time we have this problem. it's a cyclical problem in the sense that around this time you have the Muslim fasting, schools are on vacation, people are planted their farms and all of that. So demand somehow goes down around this time. And we are just coming out of a season of Lent for the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Catholics. They were fasting and all of that. So just when they were coming out, the Muslims are also going to the fasting. So that's the challenge. And so it's a practical thing. It's difficult at a society level. It's a bit difficult for anybody to do something about it now, unless we go into processes where we do egg powder. That is how we can mitigate this quality. Until we go into processes, every year around this time, we'll have this challenge. And it's a technical problem.
So if I understand you, you're saying it's if farmers are able to process the eggs a little bit more, then they will be able to avoid these losses from fresh, that affect fresh eggs.
Because around this time, demand goes down. Once demand goes down and production is constant, there will be overproduction. So the consumers will block, or those off-takers will block. So that's the challenge. Unless we go into processes, and then we can process the excess production. And when we do that, we have to ameliorated.
Mr. Ampim, but most of these farmers are just, farm gate. They're not equipped to even process the eggs further. So what happens to processing, or should there be a completely different entity picking off the eggs?
I'm not asking the farmers, including myself, to process the eggs, because I don't have the capacity to process the eggs.
Exactly, yeah.
But what I'm asking is that, let's say we are doing 1D, 1F. So
okay, fantastic.
An investor. So the government can encourage investors to go into the processing of eggs, egg white, egg yolk, egg powder. So that once we do this, the shelf life also lengthening. So the egg powder can stay for a year or more. So the structure can process. It's not the farmers. I'm not talking about farmers processing. But if the farmers has a processor who they can sell their eggs, then we will have the ability to have a good bargaining power concerning the price of eggs and all of that. But generally, around this time, every year, we encounter that challenge.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nyako Ampim. I'm going to go to the line where we have Dr. Daniel Enim. He's an economist, and he's joining us on inflationary pressures to give us some responses there. Good evening, Mr. Enim. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Dr. Enim, my apologies. Dr. Enim, we just listened to the statistical service give us an update on inflation. We know that the present figures, 19.4%, the highest since 2009. How alarming is this?
Yes, thank you very much. We're recording 19.4% as at March. To me, it's not surprising because there's a trend. If you follow the trend, you know that inflation was actually increasing steadily, month by month. In July, if we take it from July 2001, where we have the single digit, that is 9%. Right after July 2001, we moved to August. August was 9.7%. In September, 10.6%. October, 11%. In November, 12.2%. In December, that is December 2001, 12.6%. Then in January, we have about 13.9%, and in February, 15.7%, and now 19%. So there's this upward increases or increment in the inflationary pressure right from July 2001 to date. So the trend is there for us to see that something is happening within the economy, and that is the price of goods and services keep on increasing. Just that the current one, which was announced by the Ghana Statistics Service, was a little bit surprising because of the jump, about 3.7% from the previous month. So if you follow the trend carefully, there has been a gradual increase in the price of goods and services over the period. So we arriving at this point, to me, it is not surprising because the trend is there, and it is an indication telling us that, look, the price of goods and services keep on increasing month per month, and that's the reason which we are at this particular point in play. But predominantly, just like indicated by the Ghana Statistics Service, driven by food prices, that of the petroleum prices, and as well as the current effect of the Russia-Ukrainian war, which is recently beginning to have some effect on the local economy. So basically, this is what is actually driving the inflationary pressure over the period.
Dr. Nim, but when we say there's been an increase month on month steadily in the last few months, how then are we also able to, in the same breath, blame this on the Russia-Ukraine war? Doesn't it seem like there's already been a trend before this, before the war occurred?
Definitely, I agree with you. I have said it that the effect of the Ukraine-Russian war, we are beginning to have the resultant effect. This is just a signal. Because just like indicated, and I agree with you, following the trend over the period, there has been increases of month per month, and that is a clear indication that fundamentally certain variables within the domestic economy are not clicking very well. And so we couldn't have put the blame squarely on the Ukrainian-Russian war because it's just barely a month, and its effect shouldn't be that severe on the local economy.
My other worry is that you say, sorry, my other worry is that you say this is just a signal. When you say this is just a signal, doesn't mean that things are going to get worse.
Certainly so. If the war should continue, it's going to be worse, and we need to prepare towards that external effect that it may have on our domestic economy. Just like you know, we import wheat from Russia and Ukraine. We export as well to such economies, and it is having a global phenomenon, effect on the global economy. The effect of the war is having effect on the global economy, and because we are participants in the global space in terms of exporting to those markets and equally importing from those markets, we should expect a very significant effect. So what it means is that we are just beginning to have the effect, and that's the reason which we cannot put squarely the challenges that we're facing on the Ukraine-Russian war. But if the trend should continue and we fail to mitigate its effect on the local economy, then we should expect more distortion in our macroeconomic environment.
Doc, we also see that this is the highest in 13 years. How are we able to explain these figures? A 13-year high. It's, you know, sometimes you hear maybe a few years high, 2 years, 5 years, but this has gone beyond that. This shows a significant jump. It's one of those figures that you look at it and we're, okay, it's a historic high. How do we get ourselves back towards stability?
Yes, it's one in the life of an economy. You know, history will visit you, and that's the reason which economic history and analyzing economic data or historical data is very important, even when you are projecting into the future. To me, I think basically it's because of the effect of the, how do we call it, the COVID-19 on the domestic economy. When, if you recall, during the peak of the pandemic, we were actually not having issues with food sustainability or availability of foodstuffs on the market, and that's been a plus. And it is after we are now recovering from the resultant effect of the COVID-19 that things are beginning to, you know, fall apart. But to answer your question, I believe strongly that this thing shouldn't be anything that the managers of the economy shouldn't be able to handle. It's a phenomenon. So what you do is that you now look at what is driving the variables driving this significant distortion on the macroeconomic environment. One have to do with the increases in food prices. So you look at it. Number one, is it that you are not producing enough internally to be able to meet the demands of your citizens? That is the first thing. Secondly, is it because where you have been importing the food from, the availability of those food prices or the prices in those markets have increased, and for that matter, it's affecting the domestic prices? These are some of the things that ought to be looked at. So to me, quickly, we need to revisit the planting for food and jobs. Are we really on track? Is there anything that ought to be done to facilitate that particular program? To me personally, I believe that that program has helped during the peak of the COVID-19. And if there's any investment that ought to be done into that particular program, we need to facilitate that immediately to be able to address the situation. Now, another aspect has to do with the petroleum prices, of which we don't have much control over it because of the external and the global economic dynamics. So basically, these are some of the things that ought to be looked at. And overall, we're concentrating on stimulating the economic growth. That is, paying attention to the real sectors of the economy, the agri sector, the services, and the manufacturing sector. More importantly, we should be in a position to produce certain basic food items that we have a competitive advantage to produce. So to me, it should be a learning curve for the country that going forward, we should be looking at where we have a competitive advantage and should be able to produce more for local demand and also for export. So these are some of the things that ought to be looked at. So if we fail to learn from this scenario, then going forward, things may not be too good for the economy. But I strongly believe that if right policies are put in place, by 2013, everything should normalize.
Dr. Nim, how are we able to explain 19.4% off, as informed by the rising cost of food inflation? We also pride ourselves on being a very agrarian economy with a lot of our population into agriculture. So how does a country that produces so much food have to blame rising cost of food inflation and still be able to attribute some of it to Russia? How do we explain this to the ordinary man?
Yes, in fact, in terms of our food production, we produce, but the processing and then storage has been an issue. So I come from a farming community where a season farmers will produce so much of tomatoes, so much of watermelon and the like. If they do not have market for it, it goes waste. The next season, they are unable to produce in the same quantity. So it is not just a matter of producing the food. Along the food chain, the value chain, you should be able to have processing and storage. If that is done, I think the government initiated a program that is putting up the grain warehouse. I don't know how far they are, the state of that particular initiative, but it is one of the mitigating mechanisms to ensure that whatever we produce, we are able to store for use in the near future. So that is one thing. If you recall, the issue of fertilizer is also emerging strongly. What should we do quickly? Should we resort to organic fertilizer? Do we have that technology available, which I believe yes. Are we ready to invest into that? So anytime an economic challenge emerges, there is equal opportunity that ought to be exploited by any nation that is serious in transforming the lives of its citizens. So yes, we have been producing so much food, but we have not been processing much and we have not been storing much. So most of the food items go waste at the end of every farming season. And if you recall, we're doing a farming in Ghana where we depend on the rain solely. In terms of irrigation and the use of technology has not been too much. So there's the need to invest into that particular space so that we do not just produce food based on season, but we can produce food throughout the year. So these are some of the initiatives that ought to be injected into the planting for food and job. And then if that is done, that will address our food sustainability.
There was another suggestion that was raised by Michael Nyakwampin before you came on, and he's the former Greater Accra Regional Poultry Farmers Association chairman, and he was suggesting that to help reduce the losses that poultry farmers are making presently, because price of eggs have also risen, the poultry farmers say they are not able to sell as much as they used to because people are not buying that much. So they are left with more product on the farm. And of course, eggs perish pretty quickly. He was suggesting that part of One District, One Factory should be looking into processing these eggs further so people don't have to experience so many losses. Is this something you would advise?
I think it's a laudable idea. In fact, the concept of 1D, 1F is a very laudable one. But in terms of strategy and implementation, I have a different opinion, and I've stated it over and over. I'm of the view that instead of doing 1D, 1F on a wholesale, it should be resource and specific. So, for instance, just like you have said, we have poultry farmers producing eggs, producing poultry and then the like. How do we develop an industry out of that? How do we add value to what they're producing? Then we have a factory to be able to address that challenge. Okay, we have been importing manches, toothache, and whatever it is. We have availability of bamboos. Can we have a factory, 1D, 1F factory, that will produce that so that we don't use so much reserve, foreign reserve, I mean the dollar and the pounds, in importing some of these things. So you look at where you have a competitive advantage or competitive edge in terms of the availability of resources and the technology available to you, and you narrow in your factories to address that challenge within that particular space. But what we have now is that we are just putting up factories in the name of industrialization. That in itself is not bad, but we are saying that to start with where you have a competitive advantage in terms of resources, in terms of technology, and where you can also minimize import of certain product that puts pressure on your foreign currency. If that is done, the city will get its weight. There will be availability of jobs in the system, and we can create, environment where opportunities and prosperity could be created. So these are some of the things that we actually fail to do, and that's the reason which it looks as if the 1D and 1F is not having impact on the domestic economy.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Nim, for that. Just give me a moment. Let me go back to Sylvia, who's still on the line. I just wanted to sum up for us so I can let her go. Sylvia, what kind of interventions do you want to see? I mean, beyond a factory that is going to absorb some of these excesses, so poultry farmers are making less losses. What interventions do you think will help the poultry industry? Sylvia, if you're still there, please unmute yourself. I can't hear you. Okay, I think we're having network issues there with Sylvia, so I'm not able to hear her. Sylvia, we'll try to stabilize the line. Hopefully we can get you to just sum it up for us. But let me also go to Mr. Michael, who's still on the line. Okay, I think we have issues.
Thank you very much.
Okay, there you are, Sylvia. Please, go ahead. Sylvia.
Thank you very much.
Right. Please go ahead, Sylvia. Okay, Sylvia, that's unfortunate. I just wanted you to sum up your submission for us, but the lines seem pretty terrible. We'll try to stabilize it again, and when we get you, I'll just have you give us that last submission. But let me go back to Dr. Nim, who's still on the line. I think the rains have started already out there, so the lines are slightly unreliable. Dr. Nim, we're supposed to be joined by one of the statisticians from the Ghana Statistical Service, John Kwabena Ejahu. He has not been able to join us, but let me quickly see if you can throw a bit more light on one of the questions we had for him. We know that one of the regions that has been highlighted here is Brong-Ahafo region, which for the first time has recorded the highest rate of inflation of 23.3%. How did they just suddenly get thrust into the highest inflation record out of the blue?
The Brong-Ahafo region is one of our major food baskets in this country, where we have most of the foods coming from that particular space. So once they started experiencing high inflation, that is the food inflation coming from that place, then what it means is a clear signal to us that something is fundamentally not going right in terms of our agriculture mechanism, and we ought to pay a particular attention to that. So where the source, where you get the food from, this time around the prices of goods are increasing, then what it means that by the time you get to other regions, that the prices would have been doubled. So fundamentally, there's a need for us to pay recourse to the underlying factor, probably the farmers. Is it because they are not getting fertilizers? How do we support them? Do they need some capital input to be able to produce more? What is the issue? I recall vividly that last year there was an issue of maize shortage in the system, and more important from that particular region, and it has affected the whole national economy in terms of the maize supply. So there's a need for the Ministry of Agri to further investigate and pay more attention, and then get in touch with the farmers and know the core or the crux of the problem, so that they can prefer solutions. Because if that is not done, going forward, food prices will be a major headache, and once it becomes an issue, we are in trouble, because income levels are stable, prices of goods are increasing, and you cannot, once you wake up, by the grace of God, you need to fill that thing called the stomach. So predominantly, food takes about a higher percentage of our income, and so if we have to spend more to be able to get the same quantity, and your income levels are still the same, then what it means is that it may seriously affect the standard of living and then nutrition-wise, and that may eventually affect productivity, because people need to eat well to be able to have the stamina, the energy to contribute productively to the economy. So once people are not getting the right food, it affects nutrition. It becomes a health issue. It will minimize productivity, and that will affect the overall GDP growth of the economy. So these are issues that have a ripple effect and ought to be considered holistically.
That's quite interesting. We also know that farmers have been having issues with inputs, especially fertilizer, for a while now. So it definitely makes sense that it should affect the food basket of the country. But we see also here that the Upper East region recorded the lowest rate of inflation, 12.5%. The Upper East is also filled with farmers. How do you think 12.5% was recorded over there?
Yes, that is good news. The Upper East, I stand to be corrected, but I know they supply us with a lot of yam and other, food items. And once the inflation is relatively low, then what it means is that they could, balance the resultant effect in terms of at the national level, in terms of inflationary pressure coming from the food aspect. Now, so what we will have to do quickly is that, just like I indicated, that there's a need for us to pay attention to what is happening in the BA, Rongahafo. Now that Upper East is giving us a positive feedback, we equally have to do more investment to ensure that success is anchored, so that we don't end distorting that particular success story over there. So the Planting for Food and Job, to me, it has worked during the peak of the COVID. More ought to be done by the ministry, so that across board, regions that supply us with the food, we should pay more attention to those regions in terms of supporting the farmers, just like you indicated, fertilizers, other input that are needed to produce the food for the country. We need to pay attention to that, and they need to be supported. We need to move away from the usual, where some of these fertilizers and input end up in the pocket of private individuals for their selfish gain. We need to move away from that, because we are heading towards a national crisis. If any country who cannot address its food issue, you are heading into a national crisis, national security crisis. It is when people are not getting food that they will start thinking of social vices. When people are not getting food to buy, they take advantage to abuse, to abuse the law, or not to comply by the laws of the land. So food sustainability and food security is a very critical national security issues and ought to be taken seriously. So we shouldn't just be singing around it and hoping that things will change. We have done it before, so I expect the managers of the economy to go back to the drawing board. Yes, a global phenomenon is having some impact on the domestic economy, but I think on the larger scale, we still have what it takes to rewrite our economic fortunes in terms of food sustainability, in terms of creating more opportunities for the citizens. And
right. Thank you, Dr. Enim. I'm going to come back to you in a moment for with just my last question there, but let me check if Sylvia's line is more active now. Hello, Sylvia, can you hear me?
Hello?
Yes, Sylvia, I can hear you now. So let's go back to the previous question I asked. What interventions do you think can help address the challenges?
Thank you. I think Mr. Enim has summed up everything. Because currently the challenges we are facing is because of the cost of production. So if prices of things go down, if everything becomes stable, we'll be able to produce at a less cheaper price and also sell at a cheaper price, because the average Ghanaian used to buy
okay, I think I'm having
one egg for 80 pesos, 1 cedi at most. Okay. But now you are buying egg for 1 cedi, 50 pesos or 2 cedis.
Right, I understand. Thank you so much, Sylvia Delali Abu Bonsra. She's assistant farm manager at Edna Farms. She's also best female farmer from Tema West. Thank you so much for your time. Let me go to Michael Nyakwampim. Hopefully his line is also better now. Sir, if you're there, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I can barely hear you. It's very faint. If you could speak up a little bit for me. But just add quickly to what Sylvia said about the interventions. If you can just mention a few other interventions for us and sum it up for us.
Yeah. For me, I have always said, and I'll continue to say, that maize and soya contributes a lot of it does about 70% of the cost of production. So what I've always said is that government should sit down with the feed millers. How many bags of maize, how many bags of soya does each feed mill use per annum? And so government provides at a cost to the feed mills, they sign an MOU or a contract to provide about 50 to 60% of the annual consumption, so that when the maize is produced or soya is produced, there's a buffer, that's other buffer stock or any other institution that will hold that stock for the feed millers, so that they can clear these things and then there will be stable price. If we can do that, then the price of the commodity will begin to come down. And the other thing is what has been done, which we always advocated for it, is the ban on the exportation or the control on the exportation of maize. Once that is effected efficiently, we will have a lot of maize in the country, and the price will begin to come down, because part of the problem is the export, in addition to all the world crisis that is there. But part of
Thank you.
Mainly is the exportation of the
Thank
product.
you so much, Michael Nyakwampim. He's a former Greater Accra Regional Poultry Farmers Association chairman. Thank you so much for your submission. Let me just go back to the line where we have Dr. Daniel Enim to sum it up for us with this question. How come we see that imported products are less affected by inflation than local products?
Yeah, the answer is simple. The cost involved in producing those products is relatively cheaper as compared to our own. They have access to competitive lending rates or borrowing rates from their home countries. And here, averagely 24, 25 to 30%. And somebody is borrowing at 8%, maximum 10, you cannot compete with the person. Number two, they have the technology, which means they enjoy economies of scale by producing on a large scale. We don't. their government support their farmers as a way of deliberate policy to help them produce more for local consumption and for onward export. We don't do that. So these are some of the reasons which account for the reason or the rationale why foreign imported product seems to be cheaper than that of the local one.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel Enim. He's an economist, and he has joined us with a lot of input into an insight into the trends that we're seeing where the inflation is concerned. We're going to be following up with it, of course, and bringing you much more highlights in subsequent, in other bulletins right here on MX24 television. On behalf of the whole production team on Spotlight, we are grateful for your time. My name is Nwong Falong. Good evening.